Okay, so you guys sent us this Wikipedia page, right, on the 2018 Scottsdale shootings. And I gotta say, just glancing at it, this is a lot to unpack. We're talking about multiple deaths in a really short period of time. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. It all happened between May 30th and June 4th, 2018. 7 people died in total, including the shooter. And the thing is, it wasn't just random. The first few victims were all connected to a particular profession in a very specific area. And that suggests something more targeted, right? And then later, 2 more victims were found, but it's not clear if they fit into that same pattern. It's all very strange.
Right, so we've got a Wikipedia page here, right? And it seems like there's a lot of information here. Like you said, 7 deaths, multiple locations. Where do we even start with something like this? What's our goal here?
Well, I think the first thing is just to try and understand the sequence of events. Who was killed, where, and when. Then we can dig into the victims themselves. Who were they, and what, if any, connection did they have to the shooter? And finally, and maybe this is the hardest part, we need to try and figure out the motive. Why did this happen? What was the driving force behind this tragedy?
Absolutely. So let's try to take it step by step then. What was the first thing that happened?
So, the first victim was Stephen Pitt. He was a forensic psychiatrist, 59 years old. He was killed outside his office on May 31st at 5:20 p.m., shot right there on the street.
A forensic psychiatrist, I mean, that's a pretty specialized field, right? They work with the courts and with criminals sometimes, right? What was his connection to the shooter?
Well, that's one of the interesting things. It turns out Pitt had actually examined the shooter, Dwight Lamont Jones, years before the shootings. Back in 2006, Jones was going through a really messy divorce, and Pitt had evaluated him during that process.
Wow. So there's a direct link right from the start. Jones was clearly fixated on people from his past, specifically from that divorce. It makes you wonder, like, how much did that experience with Pitt stay with him? And this wasn't just some random psychiatrist. The Wikipedia page says Pitt was pretty well known in his field. He even helped identify the baseline killer. So Jones targeted someone with a significant profile. What happened next?
The shootings continued the very next day, June 1st. 2 paralegals, Valeria Sharp and Lori Anderson, were shot and killed at their law firm, Burt Feldman Grenier, in downtown Scottsdale.
Oh my God, what time of day was that?
It happened around 2:15 p.m. They were just at work when it happened. The page mentions that Sharp was actually shot in the head, but she was able to get up and try to get help before she collapsed on the street. It's just awful.
That's so disturbing. And is there a connection to the divorce here too, like with the law firm?
Yeah, the source says that Burt Feldman Grenier had been involved in Jones's divorce case as well. I mean, we don't know the details, like whether they were the main lawyers or had a smaller role, but the connection is definitely there.
Right. It's all starting to fit together, a pattern. So he targets the psychiatrist who evaluated him during the divorce, and then people from the law firm involved in the case. That's chilling.
And to make things even more clear, by 11:30 p.m. that night, the police announced that the same gun had been used in all 3 killings. So they knew they were dealing with someone going after very specific targets.
It's like he had a list, right, and was working his way through it. So at this point, they know it's connected, but they don't know who it is yet.
Right. But then, just after midnight, on June 2nd, they found another victim, Marshall Levine, a 72-year-old psychologist and counselor. He was found dead in his Scottsdale office.
Okay, so another mental health professional. Is this another direct link to the divorce, like with Pitt?
Actually, this one's a bit less straightforward. Levine himself didn't have direct contact with Jones during the divorce. But the source says he was subletting his office from a woman who had counseled Jones's son during that time.
So a connection, but not a direct one. It's like his anger and his rage were starting to spread out, like he was blaming anyone even remotely associated with his past.
Right, exactly. And by Sunday afternoon, the police had actually located Jones. They were watching him in the Fountain Hills. He was driving a gold Mercedes-Benz. And at some point, they saw him ditch a bag,
Okay, and what was in the bag?
a .22 caliber pistol. And that discovery led them to a house in Fountain Hills where they found 2 more victims, Mary Simmons, 70 years old, and Brian Thomas, 72, both shot dead.
Another double homicide. God. So was there a connection between these two and Jones's divorce? Were they on his list, so to speak?
This is where it gets a little murky. The source specifically says that Simmons and Thomas had no direct connection to the divorce case. They might have known Jones, but it wasn't like the other victims.
So he goes after people directly involved in the divorce and then these two who weren't. Does it say anything about why?
No. And to complicate things even further, the gun they found in Jones's bag, the .22, wasn't the same gun used in the first 3 shootings.
Right.
So he had multiple weapons, and it looks like these last 2 murders might have been for a different reason entirely. We're left with more questions than answers.
Yeah, this is getting really complex. So at this point, they've got him under surveillance, they've found more victims, but they still don't know why he's doing this, like what the initial motive was.
Right. And that breakthrough actually came from Jones's ex-wife. It was her current husband, a retired Phoenix police detective, who put it all together. He saw the connection between the victims and the divorce, and he contacted the police on Saturday night.
Wow, so he cracked the case, basically, just by recognizing the pattern.
He provided the crucial link. I mean, the police had all the pieces, but they needed someone with an outside perspective to see how they fit together. Once they zeroed in on Jones as the suspect, they were able to match his DNA to a shell casing from one of the crime scenes.
So that was it, the confirmation they needed. Okay, so let's talk about Jones for a minute. What kind of person was he? What else does the source say about him?
Well, he was 56 years old at the time. He had a history of violence, specifically domestic violence. There was an arrest back in 2008 or 2009 involving his wife and child. And get this, he had been living in extended stay hotels for 9 years.
9 years, that's a long time. That's just something wasn't right.
Definitely. And his ex-wife said in a statement that she had been afraid of him for those 9 years. She called him very emotionally disturbed, and apparently there were court records to back that up.
So a troubled past, a history of violence, and then this shooting spree. And in the end, how did it end?
He died by suicide. The police closed in on him, and he took his own life.
A tragic end to a horrific series of events. But we still need to talk about his motive, his reason for doing all of this. And it's not as simple as just being angry about the divorce, is it?
No, it's much deeper than that. Just days before the shooting, Jones started posting on social media, trying to paint his ex-wife in a bad light, accusing her of abusing him. And it's clear from what he posted that he believed in a vast conspiracy against him.
A conspiracy? Like what?
He believed that everyone was out to get him. His ex-wife, the psychiatrists, including Stephen Pitt, the lawyers from the firm where the paralegals worked, even the entire judicial system in Maricopa County. He thought they were all working together to ruin him, to take his son away from him. He even said so in these online videos he made, almost 10 hours worth of content outlining his theories.
10 hours. He was obsessed. He'd completely lost touch with reality.
Yeah, he was living in a world of his own making, a world where everyone was against him and violence was the only answer.
So to summarize, what we have here is a deeply disturbed individual who, fueled by a bitter divorce and a completely delusional belief in a conspiracy, went on a killing spree, targeting those he perceived as responsible for his suffering. 7 innocent people died because of his anger and paranoia.
Absolutely. It's a terrifying example of what can happen when someone becomes so consumed by their own twisted worldview that they lose sight of basic humanity.
This whole case is a tragedy on so many levels. It makes you wonder how someone can reach that point, that level of detachment from reality. And it also makes you think about how we, as a society, deal with people like this. How do we identify those who are struggling with mental illness, those who might be on a path towards violence, and how do we intervene before it's too late? That's a question we all need to think about.